Hello, everyone. I'm June Rawl, and I'm really happy that you're able to join us today for IPDay's Webinar Wednesday, Teaching Mathematical Inequalities Virtually Using Nearpod. But before we begin, let's briefly go over some things to remember. Remember that if you have a question, you may type it into the Q&A option and hit send. All attendees' microphones are muted and you are in listen-only mode. Today's presentation is being recorded and it will be available for access within 48 hours on the IPDay website. All of the materials have already been downloaded on the IPDay website, so you're able to get the PowerPoint and all the related documents pertaining to this webinar today. I'd like to introduce our facilitator today, Ronald Cruz. Ron is the coordinator for the Caribe Refugee Program and has worked with us as an IPDay trainer for many years. Ron, thank you for being our facilitator today and bringing us this information on inequalities.
Thank you so much, June. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate your time that you're spending with me and the team IPDay to focus on some math strategies for today. We're going to really focus on some virtual strategies that you can use to engage your students in the classroom. So I just wanted to say welcome, everyone, and strap in for a very nice ride that hopefully I'll be able to impart some really good strategies you can use to engage your students virtually. So right now, what I need you to do is one of two things. I need you to take out your phone or your smartphone, and I need you to download an app for me. The app is called Nearpod. All you got to do is if you have an iPhone, open your app store. If you have an Android phone, then you can open Google Play and then look for Nearpod search. And you'll know if you're downloading the correct app by looking at the icon on the screen. So that's one option for you to participate in this webinar. Another way for you to participate is for you to go to nearpod.com. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the web link into the chat. And what I need you to do is copy and paste it into your browser. You need to launch a separate browser, minimize this Zoom screen, and then enter that nearpod.com into your preferred browser. It could be Google Chrome or Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge. It doesn't really matter. You're going to have to open a separate window or browser, or use your smartphone in order to participate. Now you can keep this Zoom screen minimized and just listen to the voice, because everything that I am going to display into this webinar is also going to display into your second browser or your phone. So you can follow me either way. So I'm going to give you a moment to download that. And again, it is nearpod.com. It's the website. And on your App Store or Google Play Store, type in the word Nearpod, search. And then once the application pops up, download it or install that app. And then what you need to do is launch the app. Now, if you're launching the app, I'm going to show you the next step that you're going to do. But while we're waiting for everybody to open their a second browser or download the app into your phones, I want to just talk about Nearpod for a bit. So really and truly, we do have some objectives in this demonstration. So I'm going to be demonstrating to you how Nearpod works and how I use Nearpod to engage my students. And we need some content to go with that. So I'm going to use one of the high impact indicators for GED to drive this lesson. So basically, we're going to talk about inequalities, okay? And we're going to talk about all the important aspects of inequalities that we need to cover with our students while demonstrating to you the use of Nearpod. Why Nearpod? Well, Nearpod is such a very cool tool that combines everything, Zoom or whatever collaboration or video conferencing tool are you using does not have all of these things and requires so much preparation beforehand for me to really engage my students. Well, Nearpod is going to allow me to combine multiple functionalities in various websites into one application. I can throw in a quick quiz. I can poll my students. I can play videos, even embed questions into the videos. I can have my students create a collaborate board and a lot more. And another thing about what I like about Nearpod is my students do not need to create an account to access. All they need is a code. It's a 5-letter code that I share with my students. It's a different code every day. Sometimes the code will last for a few days, depending on the length of the lesson. And that code is all the student needs in order to join my classroom or my lesson. So once you launch your Nearpod app, it should be asking you one or two things. Okay, so if you're using your internet browser, you should see a button that says join a lesson. That's where I want you to join. I want you to experience this as a student. So click and join a lesson as a student, okay? And then it's gonna ask for you for a code, and I'm gonna give you the code in a minute. However, all I want you to do right now is stand by. So have your phone on standby, click on join a lesson, wait for that code. Now, if you're using your app, if you launch the app, it's gonna be on this right side of the screen. It's gonna be an image of that, and you're gonna have to enter the lesson code on the section that is in blue and then click join. Now, once you put in the lesson code and click join, it's gonna ask you for your name and your subject area or some information that is optional. All I need for you to type is your first name. You don't even have to give your real first name. You can just give me your alias or your nickname if you want to. It's not gonna let you sign in without a name and a code. So if you're having some difficulties, please type into the Q&A tab or the chat so that I can address your questions in a timely fashion. Hopefully you're ready, because I am going to go ahead and give you the code. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like when you're in the browser. If you're open a new browser, it's going to look like this. Okay, and you're going to go enter the code right here in this student's box that is in kind of like a salmon color. Okay, now I'm going to go now to my Nearpod account and launch the lesson for you to participate. All right, so what's gonna happen is on your screen, you see a code, a 5-letter code. All you have to do is enter it into the join box. And I'm also gonna copy this and put this into the chat. So that you can simply copy and paste that into the box. The code is V as in victory, E as in elephant, M as in Mario, K as in kilo, and N as in Nancy. Right, so if it says join a session, you need to enter this code that I just gave you. It's a 5-letter code that you have to put in. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and proceed for purposes of time, but just keep in mind, if you're just joining us now, the code will be on the upper left corner of my screen. The code is always going to remain there just in case you get kicked out of the app. You can always rejoin the app with the same code, and then you'll rejoin us live in this session. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to teach a lesson on inequalities using this app, and I'm going to demonstrate to you all of the different functionalities of this app, and you get to experience it yourself. All right, so right now, if you're joining in using your phone, I see a lot of people already join in. All right, I have the option to hide the student names in my control panel, okay? And then it's asking you to complete a poll for me. So on your phone or on your browser, on your second browser, I need you to complete this survey that pops up on your screen. And I can see who among you have already completed the survey. There's also an activity pie chart right here on the upper left corner of my screen, showing me that how much share of the people have participated and what response are they giving me. All right, so I can gauge if majority of my students have participated. Now, the question is, I wanted to ask is to gauge your level of expertise. So I can see some of you are already expert in using Nearpod. So I could probably show you some tips and tricks on how I use Nearpod in specific math activities, specifically for this particular topic on inequalities. Some of you are moderate users, and moderate users are pretty good. So hopefully you can gain some more strategies from me as well. What I normally do is I preload, create my lessons or any pre-created lessons in PowerPoint. It could be my lesson or something that I downloaded or borrowed from the internet, and then I house it into the Nearpod platform. And then I add the activities from there, such as this poll that you're participating on. So I see that majority or 95% of you have already participated. Oh, 100%. Thank you. Very good. So now we're going to go in and start the activities. So as you know, if you're a GED teacher, you should be working on and really tackling on the high impact indicators for mathematical reasoning. One of those high impact indicators is really inequalities. So what are the things that students need to be able to do in inequalities? Well, 4 things. They need to be able to solve inequalities in one variable. They need to be able to graph the solution to an inequality in one variable. They need to be able to read a word problem and solve that word problem involving an inequality. And also, sometimes students will be asked to just not solve the inequality, but simply write the inequality based on a particular context that's given in a particular word problem. So those are the 4 things students need to be understanding. So we're going to do some of these, or if not all 4 of these three things throughout this presentation. Normally, these are the questions that I would ask my students at the beginning of the lesson. Do you know how to solve an inequality in one variable using standard algorithm, or do you know how to solve a one variable inequality and identify or create a graph of that solution? So I go over these questions with my students, and the answer is no, then that's prompts me to go ahead and move on, because this is something that is new to them. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to try to do an activity called collaborate board, okay? So sometimes I would ask my students, before even going into the formal definition of inequality, I would ask them what they think an inequality is in layman's terms. When they hear the word inequality, what comes to their mind. But in this particular activity, what's going to happen is if you look into your phone, it's going to ask you one thing, okay? So in your phone, it's going to ask you, or in your second browser, it's going to ask you to pick one image or picture that you see, okay, and use that picture or image to write or say your own definition of inequality. So I'm going to post the pictures here, but keep in mind you can also access the pictures from your phone. On the upper left corner of your phone, if you click on the picture there, it's going to enlarge itself. So there are 4 pictures. There's a scale. The first one is the scale with coins on one side and dollar bills on the other. The second picture is coins stacked up with action figures, around and or on top of them. The third picture is a picture of cliffs. 2 cliffs, one is high, the other one's low, And then there's houses on top of the cliffs. And then the last picture, the fourth picture, is you see people living in tents in the foreground and buildings in the background. So what I need you to do is pick a picture, okay? Tell me which picture you picked or describe the picture that you picked, and then use that picture to define the word inequality in layman's terms. So in your screen, you will be able to type an answer. It should also allow you, if you don't want to type, it should also allow you to record your voice and say the answer into your phone. And then I'm going to be able to see your answers here. And as you can see right on the screen, I'm seeing some people that are indicating their response already. So keep that coming. So again, let me just repeat while we're waiting. So the instruction is, you're going to pick one out of the four pictures here. Okay, it could be the scale, it could be the coins, the stacked coins, it could be the cliffs, or it could be the tents with buildings, one of the four, but use that to define the meaning of inequalities. Now, this activity is very important to me because I wanted to know which picture will my students select, which definition of inequality closely resembles what my students think about inequalities, okay? And then that will help me kind of tap on prior knowledge of my students. So in here, we have some people that says when there is no balance. So I'm assuming that they selected the scale for this particular answer, okay? And then if I like a particular response, I can also share the response to your phone or to your browser. So if I click on this button like here, share, and pardon me if you're trying to type in an answer here, if I click on share, you should be able to see that pop up on your phone as well. Scale and inequality compares two values showing less than or greater than or equal to. And then I can unshare that as well. So if I like something, okay, there you go. All right, so continue. I'm seeing a lot of responses here. I'm seeing some that I really like, really like. I choose the housing in the bottom right-hand corner to define an inequality. An inequality is not being able to have access to tools and resources that all people have or most people have. So I'm going to share this response to you. I like it so much. Okay. And let me close this now. I like this one as well. The third quadrant picture, the higher cliff is greater than in height than the lower cliff. So we could be comparing quantities such as heights. Okay, very good. Difference in size, scale of money. Some have more, others have less. You know, the photograph of cliffs is a fabulous visual to me because the gap between the two shows the difference between greater than and less than in life. Excellent. I love this activity because it adds more real world value to the mathematical concept that I'm going to try to introduce. Now, here's someone over here that actually had an audio. So I'm going to go ahead and play this audio. I'm going to share and play the audio. Nope, the audio is not working. Maybe we're going to try to get that. Something tells me that they probably clicked on the audio, but did not necessarily.
That was me, Ron. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's fine. That's fine. All right, perfect, June. I see that you're participating. I'm seeing all of you are participating 100% in this activity. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. So after I ask my students what they think about what an inequality is, I now then make the comparison between the actual definition of an inequality, or what the mathematical inequality pretty much, and comparing that to their real world definition of inequality. And they can see the parallelism between the two, that their idea of inequality is the same as a mathematical inequality. It just is represented in symbols. And in this case, we're using these symbols up here: less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. I even offered them a visual, the same, very similar visual as the scale. The dollar bills versus the coins and the weights, differences on the weights, and tell them that we're talking about two quantities here, A and B, and they're not equal. They're not equal. There is an imbalance on the scale. All right. And then after I introduce the meaning of inequality, I'm going to quiz my students. So there's going to be a quiz that will pop up on your phone or your second browser. There are only 2 questions. And keep in mind, I'm not going to show who you are on the screen, so it's blacked out here on my end. Go ahead and pick out the quiz. I want to know, I want to first gauge how much of my students already know about an inequality, or based on my explanation or the examples I've given in class. I wanted to see if my students are understanding what inequality is. I use this quiz multiple parts of my presentation or my lesson, just to gauge where should I move on, or should I stop and review other topics first before I can, if my students are getting some answers wrong. And based on the results of this quiz, you guys are doing fantastic. I see a 75% of you so far have answered correctly. So that's a really good indication that you guys have a very strong foundational knowledge of inequalities. And again, we're multitasking here. You're listening to me, and at the same time, you're trying to quiz. But of course, if you're doing this with your students, you're going to have to keep quiet to allow them to take the quiz, right? And if ever I wanted to see a particular student that's struggling, let's say they didn't get any of the answers correct, there is a report a report that I can print out or save as a PDF after this lesson has been commenced. So for the purposes of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. But great job, guys. You have scored greater than 75% on this particular activity. Talk about saying it in inequalities. Now, after I introduce the definition of inequalities, I'm going to give them examples of inequalities. But instead of starting with an inequality, like a mathematical statement, I'd rather just talk about inequalities in the real world first. Like, here are some examples of real world inequalities. Speed limit. If you see you're driving on the highway or the interstate, you always see this number posted by the side of the road every couple of miles, right? And that number represents an inequality, because that number, it signifies to you that the legal speed on that road that you're traveling should be less than or equal to that number, okay? Now, another example is a credit card. Your monthly payment to your credit card, okay, has a minimum payment amount, right? There's a minimum payment due. That in itself is an inequality, because you can pay more than that, but definitely, or equal to that amount, but definitely not below your minimum payment due. So that's also an inequality. Another example is traveling. We travel, maybe not during this time of COVID, but when we travel a lot to and from work, you always have to budget in the amount of time you have to get to work so that you get there on time. That number that you're allocating yourself, that amount of time that you're allocating yourself to leave your house and travel to work or to wherever you're going, is an example of inequality. Now, I'm going to do a collaborate board based on those examples, okay? And what I want you to do is, I need you to share some other examples of real world inequalities that you see in your, around you, okay? So there's 2 things. You can type your example into the into the response box, okay? There's a limit of 250 characters there because this is just gonna be examples, okay? Or you can also post a picture to show an example. In order to post a picture, you can click on the photo icon, on the bottom right corner of your response box. And if you click on that, it's going to allow you to search Google for an image. So for example, I'm looking for money. I can just type in money on the Google search bar, and I could attach that money, save it, and post that. So you will see this post is my post. All right, so let's look at some of the examples that some of you have already given. A wedding budget. Is somebody getting married today or soon? Weddings are usually something that we plan so far ahead, right? And so what we want is we don't want to go over that budget because you're already spending a lot. So that's very good. I see some good examples here as well. The weight on an elevator is an example of an inequality. There's always the maximum number of people that can go into the elevator before it starts to malfunction or give you like that alert, that beeping sound that you've exceeded the weight limit of the elevator. So these are all very good examples. I see tire pressure, very good. Whoever sent this out is, I love this example, by the way. Tire pressure is a really good example of an inequality because you cannot go below that tire pressure. You can be equal to or slightly greater than. This is an example, I think, is going to be a really good example of a compound inequality, which is not covered in our topic for today, but nonetheless, this is a good example. Making a smoothie. Okay, so I like this picture of this smoothie. I like it, but I want to know more about it. So if you are the person who typed into this, could you please explain why you used making a smoothie, an example of an inequality, and you can type it either in the Q&A or the chat bar. Tell us, why do you think making a smoothie is an example of an inequality? These are all really good, guys. This is going to archive all of your responses into this, and you can revisit this post later on if you want to check on. But I really like the Collaborate tool because it allows for some greater creativity for my students to post pictures or otherwise type in words or example. But this is where I see the variety of perspectives, variety of examples. It's a really good word wall. It's a really good concept map for my students to take a look at. And again, keep in mind, my students will be able to access this even after the lesson has commenced. If they wanted to add more stuff to their response or post a new response. All right, thank you for that. Now, here are some more examples. Just like I said, some of you already mentioned the elevator. Election is another example. We just ended the election season, and there's a minimum number of electoral votes needed to win the presidency. So that's an example of inequality. Nutrition, if you're trying to either bulk up or lose weight, that will determine the inequality for your life. So how many calories do you need to consume in order to bulk up, a minimum number of calories, or what is the maximum number of calories you can consume if you are on a diet or in a weight loss program. So those are all really good examples of inequalities. Now that my students have a clear grasp of those concepts, then I can start introducing vocabulary. So I'm going to give them like a vocabulary wall and say, okay, this is what this means, so that when I refer to these vocabulary words, they would understand what it means. So my students can print this out, take a picture, save it into their phone, or save it into their computer so that they have these vocabulary words in hand. I want to show examples. I want to show definitions so that they know what I'm referring to at different points during the lesson. After I talk about the inequality vocabulary words, I'm going to engage my students with an activity. So If you're an expert user of Nearpod, I like this so much. I hope you're using the draw tool. This is one tool that's super important, especially in teaching math, and especially when in our virtual setting, that students need to be able to graph, draw, but that's hard to assess when you're doing it virtually through Zoom or through Canvas. So what I'd like to see is I want my students to be able to, on the spot, have a whiteboard through their phone and respond to this question. So what I want you to do is I want you to write an inequality statement. So really pay attention to what you're saying here. An inequality statement has two sides. You have the quantity to your left, the quantity to your right. And of course, you have to have that inequality symbol in between. So if I'm saying at least 12 people attended the workshop, how are you going to write that inequality? So in your phone, on your phone, using your phone or your second browser, if you're using your mouse, you may have to practice a little bit. You can change the color of your pen. There's an eraser there as well that you can use to erase what you wrote. But once you hit submit, it's final. Okay? So what I'm seeing on my screen is like the ones in yellow are in progress, so they have not submitted their work completely. Okay, and the ones in green, that means you've already clicked submit or send. Okay, so these are now final, and you will not have the opportunity to change your answer. So I really like this. Okay, I really like this one. This one is one of our first. I'm going to share this to you guys. This one says P is greater than or equal to 12. Very good. If you have a letter on the left side of your inequality and then 12 on the other side, the symbol in between has to be greater than or equal to. I could tell some of you are really having fun. This one even put some designs to it. So I'm going to share it to your phone so you can see it. All right, so this is good. It really doesn't matter what letter of the alphabet you use for your variable, but I really, really like using variables that really are significant to the situation. So if you're talking about 12 people, then you might want to use P or A as an attendee. But X, W is always going to be good. Again, like I said, there's no right or wrong variable in this case. Now let's try this again. It would take me at most 5 minutes to complete this quiz. So you're going to have a new question on your phone or on your second browser. What I need you to do is draw away, okay? What would be the inequality that will represent this scenario? It would take me at most 5 minutes to complete the quiz. And I need you to pay attention to the word at most and really carefully understand what inequality symbol would at most be, would at most represent. You gotta be careful, okay? Because you can easily get this answer wrong. You gotta test your knowledge first. Before you click on submit, check, does that inequality look right, okay? So I'm gonna wait for some of you. At most 5 minutes to complete the quiz, okay? At most 5 minutes to complete the quiz. I see some correct answers here, very good. I see some of you revising your answers, very good. For purposes of time, I'm gonna go ahead and select a good answer here and post it to you. So I'm gonna select this one, I'm gonna share it to your phones and your screens. T is less than or equal to 5. Very good. That is correct. But see, look at the wording. I'm using the word at most, but yet the inequality symbol that you guys, most of you guys are using are less than. So it's kind of like reversed, right? So thank you guys for participating in this one. I see lots of correct answers. I'm seeing lots of revisions as well. Very good that you're checking your line of reasoning and making sure that you are submitting the correct answer. So for purposes of time, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. All right, so then I'm gonna give my students like a tip, like, okay, whenever you see this this phrase, that means that inequality. So I want my students to be able to remember. And the most confusing of all is the at least and or the at most. So I wanted to give them like a quick guide. Okay, here's a little brief guide for you. Use this as you're trying to get used to the learning inequalities. But later on, I'm going to take this away. They need to be able to remember that when we're talking about at least or at most, that we're using almost the reverse of that symbol, in order to accurately describe the inequality. Now, after I talked about that, I'm going to talk about solving inequalities. I'm going to give them the steps on how to solve inequalities. These are steps that you are very familiar with. You may have your own wording or whatnot, but I try to simplify it as much as I can. So I'm telling my students, okay, whatever you do on the one side of the inequality, you have to also do it on the other side of the inequality. Keep in mind that in order to solve the inequality, you want to keep one variable, all the variables in one side, and then all of the numbers on the other side, okay? You can combine like terms to simplify it even more. And usually, if you want to remove the clutter around the variable, you use the inverse operation. So for example, if you have 2x, then you might want to divide by 2 on both sides to remove that 2 and just isolate that x on one side. All right. While students are learning how to solve the inequality, it is super important, teachers, that you go over some of these properties of inequalities. These properties is what's allowing them to be able to perform those operations in order to solve the inequality. So the first property I want to talk about is the addition and subtraction in property. That what it says is that whatever you can add whatever number to both sides of the equation and never change the value of that inequality or the truth value of the inequality. And then on the same respect, you can also subtract the same amount to both sides of the inequality and never change the truth value of the inequality. So sometimes I would give my students the rule right up here, but then they won't get it, right? They won't get it because they it seems like they're reading something in Chinese. So I'm going to give them a real life representation as well. So think about two people. Just say in this picture, we've got two people, Becky and Janet. Let's just pretend Becky is the one with the curly hair and Janet is the one with the straight hair. Okay, so we've got Becky and Janet, and we'll say, okay, let's assume that Becky is older than Janet. Okay, well, if Becky is older than Janet, then we can write the inequality B is greater than J, where B and J represents Janet and Becky's ages. Okay, and so after 10 years, or if we add 10 years, would Becky and Janet will still have the same relationship, that Becky's age will still be older than Janet? Well, of course, it will not change, okay? And same as true if you travel back in time. Let's say if we travel back 10 years back in time, so then Becky will be 10 years younger, and so is Janet. So in this case, the relationship between Becky and Janet's age, which is B is greater than J, will always remain true, regardless at what point in time in their lifespan we're talking about. So I see we've got some chat questions here and chat responses. I see the response. Oh, let me circle back onto that smoothie as well. So in here, you can see on the chat, because you can use less or more of an ingredient to make the smoothie a different flavor or texture. So depending on how you want your smoothie, you can have either greater than, less than, or equal to a certain amount of those ingredients. Thank you for sharing that. Another comment here is um, uh, this person is working on a correctional institution and cannot access the phone. So yes, if you cannot access it through the phone, you can access it through your computer. You just need to open a new browser, okay? And then type in nearpod.com into that browser, and then you can join this session by clicking on join and entering the this code right here, VEMKN. Okay, it's not too late to join for some of you that are just jumping into this webinar. All right, so let's talk about another set of properties of inequalities here, which is the multiplication and division properties, that you can multiply by any number greater than 0, of course, both sides of the inequality and never change the truth value of the inequality. The same is true as if you divide. So if you divide both sides of your inequality with the same number greater than 0, it has to be greater than 0, okay? Then it will not change the value of that inequality. So let's go back to Becky and Janet's situation here in this case. So we'll still assume that Becky is still older than Janet, or B is greater than J. When they are twice their current age, meaning if I multiply their ages by 2, okay, B times 2 and J times 2, the B times 2 would still be greater than the J times 2, okay? So which preserves the truth value of the inequality. The same is true with division. So if they are half the age they are now, so if they take half of Janet's age and half of Becky's age and compare them, Becky's age would still be greater than Janet, because B divided by 2 is greater than J divided by 2. It does not change the value of the inequality. Well, there's one exception. The exception is if you divide or multiply by a negative number, you need to reverse that inequality symbol. Just for example, in this case, if you got negative 3n is greater than 12 and negative, so in order to solve this inequality, you're going to have to divide both sides by negative 3. If you do that, you're going to have to, at the end, reverse the inequality symbol. So in this case, we started off with a greater than, and then at the end, we're going to have to flip it to less than to keep that inequality true. Why? We can always test the property and prove this to our students that if we don't flip that inequality sign, that statement will no longer be true as what you're seeing in this example on the screen, okay? Now let's move on and then continue. So sometimes I'm going to give my students an example. This one is an addition example. I always tell my students, if you're trying to work on an inequality, draw a line across the symbol so you know which are the two sides of the inequality, so that you'll remember whatever you do on the left, you're going to have to do on the right, just like the example here that I'm showing you. And then last but not the least, I'm going to teach my students to graph the solution. So in this slide, I'm going to go over how to graph a solution. Let's say, for example, my solution was x is less than 8. I'm going to show them an example. I'm going to show them how it looks like. Decide whether, first you're going to have to draw the number line, of course. And you just need a few numbers on either side of the number 8, to show. You don't really have to draw a number line starting from 0, 1 every time. It really will depend on what this number is right next to the inequality symbol. And then draw, once you've drawn your number line, decide whether it's an open circle or a closed circle based on the inequality symbol. And then you're going to now just determine at the end which side the arrow will go. Will it go to the left of the open or closed circle or to the right of the open or closed circle? And in this case, we're talking about X, all the numbers that are less than 8. Well, if you think about it, 9 and 10 are not numbers that are less than 8. They're really pertaining to these numbers 5, 6, and 7. So then that point gives me the idea of what direction my arrow should go. All right, so let's test what you've learned so far. Let's try graphing your inequality here. So I'm going to give you an inequality on your phone or in your second screen. You're going to have an inequality, X is less than -3. So try it. I wanted to see how you're going to graph. So what I like about Nearpod is when you're, you can use different backgrounds. You can use your own background, just like what I'm doing now. So for some of you that are really expert users, have you tried uploading your own background for different math activities that you do with your students? This one is I like the most because the number line's already pre-drawn for my students. So all they have to do is draw or sketch the inequality solution. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that while I look into the chat for some questions. Okay, I'm looking at the chat for some of the questions here. No, I do have some Q&A here. Okay, all right. So at some point, yes, I'm gonna try. If we have time towards the end, I'm gonna try. You're gonna have to see it for yourself. Create your own Nearpod account. You're gonna have to create your own Nearpod account as a teacher. Okay. So, but students do not need an account for themselves. You're going to be able to see all of this because they have lots and lots of examples of pre-made lessons already that you can use right away. So you don't have to recreate the tool. You know, if you found a really good lesson on, let's say, solving one-step equation, then go ahead and just use that and then edit it. So you'll be able to see what's happening in the background. All right, so going back to this activity, I'm seeing lots of good answers. I know it's really hard to draw using your mouse. That's why, you know, on the phone it's a little bit better. I'm going to pick some really neat ones here. This one's really neat. I really like how you stayed along the lines. I'm going to share it with you guys. All right, that's really good. So let's try one more. This time, decide whether it's a closed or open circle first, guys. Okay, pay attention to that closed or open circle when you're graphing the inequality. Okay, so I'm going to give you this. In this case, this example is X is greater than or equal to -4. Or this might be a little bit easier because you're not, you know, trying to draw an open circle is a little bit difficult if you have thick fingers. Now, I always recommend my students to use a stylus. You know, stylus are now very inexpensive. You can buy from pretty much anywhere, Amazon, you know, for less than $1. Stylus would allow my students to be able to write or draw on their phones or their iPads. And by the way, iPads is also, if your phone is super small that you're not able to, you know, use it, use an iPad. iPad will give you more of the screen space to give you more flexibility to do, especially when you're drawing. You know, I always make sure that my images, the background image is always large enough for my students to be able to do. So I'm sometimes going to enlarge this number line and only focus on the numbers that I want them to see. But in this case, I didn't do that. I want them to see pretty much from -8 to 8. Now I'm seeing lots of good answer, correct answer here. Pay attention to the shading, okay? So in this case, you need to have a shaded response because this inequality is inclusive. So I'm gonna show you an example of a correct answer here. Really good, she drew, or he, whoever this person drew it in red pen or red ink. Very good. It has to be a shaded in circle. Thank you very much for all of your participation. Hopefully you're enjoying this activity. This time, I'm going to ask you to graph the solution to the inequality. And that this time you're going to have to solve the inequality first and then graph the solution. So I'm trying to kind of spice things up for my students and make it a little bit more difficult. So they may have to solve this problem on a sheet of paper first, and then once they arrive at the solution, then they can graph that answer and put it onto their phone. But in this case, I made the numbers easy enough that you can really solve this mentally. Okay, try that. See if you can solve this inequality mentally and see if you can graph the solution here. Okay, so in this case, it might involve subtracting 3 from both sides. Okay, and maybe even dividing by 2 on both sides later on. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not going to give you the answer here. But you can look at my screen and see what other students are saying. So if you're kind of like quite unsure, if you wanted to submit your answer, then look at my screen and see, okay, just to give you like that extra boost of confidence that you've done this correctly. All right, I'm going to select one that has done a correct answer here. I'm going to share it with you. Correct answer is on the screen right now. Very good. Great job, guys. I can see really where my students are struggling with this drawing activity and provide the appropriate feedback for them. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is a time to climb, but we're not going to do this time to climb activity for purposes of time. Time to climb is an activity that would allow my students to compete with each other through a series of questions. It's a time question, so, and how quick they respond will give them a score. You know, it's very similar to, so I'm just gonna test it with you guys for a little bit. I don't know if we have time. Yes, we do a little bit of time, but you can connect through this game. Your avatars would pop up. And then when I click on start on my end, then it's going to engage you in a series of questions, and they're timed, and you're going to have to answer correctly, but at the same time quickly. Okay, and students enjoy this activity. They get to compete, and sometimes there's a prize waiting for them at the end. And I see some of you are already popping up here. I can even show your names here so you can see who those are. Okay, I can point to your avatar. Okay, and when I click start, and keep in mind I'm going to, all right, there's going to be a question popping up on your screen right now. Go ahead and answer the question. It's a time question. It'll give you points whether you answered correctly and quickly. Now on my screen, it's going to show your progress after that first question, and it ranks all of you and gives you points. Now I can see Christina is going to be the top scorer right now. Let's see if we can hold on to that spot. There's a bunch of questions. The questions I always wanted to make it from easy to more difficult type questions. My students, and I'm sometimes going to throw in some distractors there, but I want them to be able to select which information is accurate or not. Okay, Rhonda is now at the top spot. I'm going to hide the student's name now and move on. So just keep in mind that that game is going to continue, and then my students will have, there's going to be a winner, a first runner-up at the end. Now, last but not the least, I'm going to cap it off by solving real world problems with my students. Well, what better way to do a solving real world problems with my students if we can do and solve problems using a video. So first, I'm going to go over the steps on how to solve problems involving inequalities, and the steps are listed here on this slide. And then I'm going to engage my students through a video. In this case, you're going to have to look at my screen or your Zoom screen to view the video. And at certain points, at certain points of the video, there's going to be questions that will pop up on your phone to make sure that you're paying attention and solving the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and click play. By the way, this video is taken, if you like this video, you can always get this video and play this video from the Update website's Grab and Go section. So I'm going to go ahead and resume. Welcome to Florida Update's Grab and Go series. In this particular Grab and Go, we're going to focus on writing and solving linear inequalities. This activity is designed to be done with your students. Your task is to plan an event at this restaurant given a budget of $3,000. If the set menu costs $25 and the cost to rent this section of the restaurant is $250, determine how many guests you can invite. All right, so there's going to be a first question that's going to pop up on your phones or your second browser, okay? The question is, list all of the important information from the problem, okay, in order to solve the inequality. So list all the important information. Use your phone, type your answers. What are all the important information from this? You can look at my screen to see what are the given information from the word problem here. And then you need to type that response into your phone. And I wanted to see what you think. What are the pieces of information that are needed in order to set up the inequality here? So let's see who has some answers so far. Right now, it's still showing. Okay, very good. Budget, cost per person, rental space, good. Budget, number of people to participate. You need three things, pretty much. You need the budget, the number of guests, and how much it costs to rent the space. So the amount of money or the cost to rent the space is divided into two things as well. So cost to rent a space and how much does it cost for a plate for a person to come in, right? So all of your answers are good. So just trying to see here, see if everybody's paying attention, all right? All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and move on. What do we know about the event we are planning? The total budget for the event is $3,000. We set up the inequality. The total amount of the expenses is less than or equal to $3,000. What do we know about our expenses? The set menu is $25 per person, and the cost to rent the space is $250. All right, so this time, based on the given information that I just went over, I want you to pick which inequality best represents this situation. Okay, so go ahead and answer this question through your phone. Okay, so pay attention to the inequality symbol, how the numbers are arranged, which number should go with the X, and what does the X represent here? So you need to be paying attention to all of those. All right. And I'm not going to wait for 100% of you to answer, because for purposes of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So if your answer is, right now, the top answer is C. Okay, let's see if you got the answer correct. Adding this information into our inequality, we have 25 times X, which is the total number of people that we're going to be inviting, plus $250, which is the cost of the rental, and the $3,000, which is our budget. All right, so now the last question is, what is the solution to the inequality? All right, so answer this question. I'm going to show you again, the inequality. The inequality is 25x plus 250 is less than or equal to 3,000. If you're going to solve that inequality for x, what would that inequality look like? So let's see. All right, go ahead and type your answers through your phones. I'm seeing some participation here. You guys are still solving. Very good. You might want to, work it out on a scratch sheet of paper on the side. Put your answer in there. Okay, I'm going to look at the chat right now. Yes. So there's a question here, on the drawing. So of course, before I go on full-fledged using Nearpod with my student, I'm just going to do a Nearpod on how to use Nearpod so that the students can have the opportunity to experiment on the different activities and tools just to get a try out, no pressure, ungraded activities, okay? All right, so purposes of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Let's check to see if your answer is correct. 60% of you said that the answer is C, is less than or equal to 110. Let's check if you're correct.
Solving our inequality, 25x plus 250 less than or equal to 3,000. First, we subtract 250 from both sides of the inequality. Bringing down to 25x, we have 25x is less than or equal to 2,750. Then, we divide both sides by 25 to isolate the x on the left side of inequality. Canceling out the 25, we divide 2,750 by 25. So x is less than or equal to 110. Based on our computation, the maximum number of guests we can invite is 110 guests. So, did you get the correct answer? I hope you like this activity from Florida IP Day. For more information and handouts, you can visit www.floridaipday.org.
All right, so that is all we have for now, but just in case, this is my last word for you guys. All of these things and activities that I've shown to you are aligned to the GED type test question. And to show you what that is, here's an example. In your slides, I have provided you with several links that you can use to continually teach your students some how to solve inequalities. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my presentation and then kind of end this presentation for you. So if you got any questions, just type it into the chat. We'll try to answer this. But right now, I am going to turn it over to June for our quick survey.
Thank you, Ron. I know I learned a lot. Here's a feedback slide that's appearing on your screen. If you could take just a minute to answer these 3 short questions, we would really appreciate your feedback regarding this webinar. In the meantime, I will remind you that our next webinar will be conducted on May 5th. It's a roadmap for adult educators on how to transition to learning online. Thank you so much for joining us today. That ends our webinar. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Have a great day.